All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing Uther by Jack Whyte. Don't know if you can see that there. This is book number 5 in his epic 10-book series on King Arthur called the Camelot Chronicles. Now I've got the hardcover. I've got all of them in hardcover right here, all 10 books, as you can see. I've also got the 3 Knights Templar books that Jack Whyte wrote. And then I've got the 3 William Wallace, Robert the Bruce books that he wrote about Scotland. So I've got all my Jack Whyte collection right here. I've got all of these in hardcover. They look really dope on the shelf. I'll go real close here so you can see. Anyway, I also have the entire collection of King Arthur books in these little mass market paperbacks too. And I've got them all on audible.com. I mean, it's just one of my favorite series. So here we go. Let's talk about the covers first, because you know I love graphic design and cover illustration. The paperback has the same cover as the hardcover. Same artwork done by Edward Miller. Now, this book came out in 2001. Like I said, it's the 5th book in the series, and it is a companion book to book number 4, The Eagle's Brood, which I just reviewed about 2 weeks ago on the channel. So The Eagle's Brood was a novel about King Uther and Merlin the Magician, told from the perspective of Merlin. Now, Uther is the same exact story that's in this book, but told from the perspective of King Uther. And they're my 2 favorite books in the series, I think, just because we get such an in-depth look at both characters from the various perspectives of the 2. Well, there's only 2 perspectives, but you knew what I'm saying. Now, I'm holding up the wrong damn book. We'll edit that out. This is the book we're reviewing. Okay, so Jack Whyte wanted to do this. He wanted to do The Eagle's Brood. He wrote a story about King Arthur and Merlin growing up, and not King Arthur, King Uther and Merlin growing up, and told from Merlin's perspective. And then he's like, well, I want to do the same story again, told from Uther's perspective, so we can get. But he was in the introduction to this. He was hesitant to do it. He thought that will never work. No one would ever want that. But then he read Ender's Shadow by Orson Scott Card, which of course does the same thing. Ender's Game is told from the perspective of Ender. Ender's Shadow, of course, is told, same story, but told from the perspective of, I think is Bean or something like that. I can't remember which character was Ender's Shadow. But he's like, after he read those books, he was like, okay, I can do it. So he was inspired to do this little thing. Now, there are maps in these books. The maps are of course, you know, the southern British Isle, southern England, where King Arthur was, So in this book, again, just like in The Eagle's Brood, we start with the birth of Uther and Merlin. They were born on the same day. They were cousins. They grow up together. And throughout the 2 books, you get to see their whole lives play out. And all these adventures they go through, and all the political intrigues and the deaths and the close calls and all that, we get to see not just once in The Eagle's Brood, but we get to see them again in this, and it's totally cool, and I was down for the ride. Edit that out. I was down for the ride because I really liked The Eagle's Brood, and I was really interested to see what the story sounded like and looked like from King Uther's perspective. Because Merlin and Uther, though they're cousins and they grew up together, they're vastly different in personality. I mean, at the birth of Uther, he just as he's growing up, even his own mother is scared of him. She fears her young son. I mean, he's just kind of a wild card. He's got, there's even the events surrounding his birth are filled with tales of pagan sacrifice and brutal pagan sacrifice, and just all of this stuff going on at the beginning of this book. Merlin is more of a bookish character, like he's into the books and studying and the chemistry and figuring things out in the world. Uther is just a straight fighter. He's just a warrior. Now, that's not to say that Merlin isn't a warrior too, because they are both very accomplished warriors. It's just Uther, in the first book, Eagle's Brood, came across as a bit of a bully, a bit of a hothead, a bit of a guy that just makes rash decisions. And so you're kind of always on Merlin's side in that book because you're getting the perspective of Merlin in that book. And you kind of, like, when is Merlin going to tell his friend to just, be like a normal human? But then you get the perspective of Uther, and what you think of Uther completely changes in this book, because now you're like, now I see where he was coming from. I mean, Uther, even though he's a fighter, he's a really shrewd guy. He just comes across as like this bumbling jock in the first book. But in this book, he comes across as a really shrewd guy. And even a lot of the things that happened in the Eagle's Brood, when you read them from Uther's perspective, you're like, oh my God, the whole scene, the whole thing makes so much more sense now. And it enriches everything that you just read. Now, Uther, one of the things is even though he's a warrior and a fighter, he loves his comforts. Like, he loves Camelot and how clean the city is, and the castles are clean. And there's a lot of... He hates being amongst the peasantry, kind of. Like, he's very disgusted with the dirtiness of the world around him, but things have to be clean in Camelot. He's really kind of wedded to that. That's not something that I would have known about him if I'd have just read the first book. It's an interesting perspective that added a lot of depth to his character. And you start rooting for him in this book. You start rooting for Uther in this book, even more than you were rooting for Merlin in the first book. Both are great, great protagonists. Both are a little flawed. Both of them have their problems, but both of them are stalwart. They fight for what they believe. In this book, we get to see a meeting of, like in the Eagle's Brood, we got to see the meeting of a lot of the famous kind of characters that are in the King Arthur lore. Here we get to meet a few more that we didn't meet in the Eagle's Brood, like we get to meet Wherein. And we get a little bit more depth on Ygraine, who is the mother of King Arthur, that the Uther and Ygraine get together and have a son, of course. Spoiler alert. Happens on the very final pages of this. But anyway, you get to see the meeting of Uther and Ygraine. Now, they know who each other is by reputation. Ygraine is already married to King Lot. And through sort of a series of accidents, she becomes a prisoner. Oh, I shouldn't even be saying this. I'm just going to say, the meeting between Uther and Ygraine is one of the most well-crafted, sleight of hands, double-crossing kind of meeting between two eventual lovers that you'll ever read. And I can't say anything more than that. But I was glued to the scenes whenever these interplays would kind of play out. And they do quite a bit, and I liked it. And it's something that we didn't get to see in the other book. So will this forbidden love beget King Arthur? Well, yeah, it does. It does in the end. You know what I mean? That's just, because the other 5 books are about King Arthur. The first 5 books in the series are about Arthur's heritage, his ancestors, the people that. How did Arthur get to be Arthur? How did Excalibur get to be Excalibur? How did Merlin get to be a magician? How did the Avalon and Lady of the Lake and the Sword in the Stone? How did all that kind of stuff? How is that all going to play out? It's just such a great series. This is a 10 out of 10. The Eagle's Brood was a 10 out of 10. The companion book Uther is a 10 out of 10. My 2 favorite books in the series, but the whole series is like a 10 out of 10. But anyway, that's my review of Uther by Jack Whyte.